Welcome to the Brainiate Show, where we talk about all things Salesforce, sharing the coolest features, solutions, and best practices to turn you into a Salesforce rock star. Here's your host, former attorney turned Salesforce consultant and trainer, David Giller.
Hello and welcome everyone. Happy Tuesday. I hope you are all doing well. I am super excited for today's show because I am joined by none other than Gina Marques from Own Backup. Gina, how are you today?
I'm great. Hi, everybody.
It's great to see everyone. Gina, for those who don't know you, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I've been with Own Backup. I work for Own Backup, Salesforce partner, if you haven't heard about us. But I'm the director of CRM and business applications here. I have a team of Salesforce admins, and we make Own Backup great.
I love the Own Backup team. And by the way, I will say this publicly, that my family continuously makes fun of me anytime I mention my friends at Own Backup. I'll say it like in a sentence. I'll say like, my Own Backup friends. I was chatting with some of my Own Backup friends and my family's like, you're such a loser. You have backup friends? But anyway,
We are one big happy family.
I'm thrilled to have my Own Backup friends. Yes. For those of you who are new to the Brainiate Show Live, basically the show is broken up into 3 distinct segments. That's what you see on the bottom of the screen over there. So the first segment is where we are talking about strategy. Otherwise, I sometimes refer to it as the talking head segment, where basically we're sharing some best practices, some tips associated with how to do things better within the Salesforce ecosystem. Sometimes careers, sometimes best practices around, let's say, sharing rules or visibility permissions or project management issues. Today, we're going to be talking about data quality issues and how to basically nip it in the bud when we might find some data quality issues in our Salesforce. So the first segment is going to be focused on strategy. And for today, we're going to be talking about data quality. For the second segment, which I'm referring to as Show Me, that's where we're going to be looking at the screen to learn how to do something in Salesforce or something related to Salesforce. And in the last segment, it's open Q&A. Any question that anyone has on anything Salesforce related, Gina and I, we are going to do our best to try to answer those questions. You can feel free to try to stump us. We have no hesitation in saying when we don't know, but we'll try to at least point you in the right direction. Anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the strategy segment. All right, come on. We got to make it a little bit fun. The secret to keeping your Salesforce data clean. And by the way, as you see from the scrolling ticker on the bottom over here, if you have any comments about anything that we're talking about, by all means, go ahead and throw it into the comments wherever you're watching this live stream. If you have any questions about anything that we're talking about, we're going to, as I mentioned before, we're going to be addressing those questions in the last segment for open Q&A. But please go ahead and put a Q at the beginning of your comment if it's a question, so that we know to it should stand out when we're scrolling through all of the comments, because sometimes it could be a little bit overwhelming and we're not really sure, is that a question for me, or you're asking someone else, like responding to someone else's comment in the thread. Anyway, so let's jump into it. So when it comes to data quality, basically there are often, sorry for looking on the side over here. No, I am not looking at Facebook or something. I am actually looking at some of my notes over here. So basically, when it comes to data quality, there are actually many different things that we need to look at. It can be super overwhelming for any Salesforce admin when we start to realize that there are some data quality issues that we need to look at. So I'm going to bust the first myth. Usually, I have found that when talking about data quality to anyone as it relates to Salesforce, everyone's brains immediately go to duplicates. Yeah, duplicates is one type of data quality issue But there are many, many different types of data quality issues. So yeah, duplicates. Great. We got one of them so far. So let's put that aside, because we satisfied that need to talk about duplicates. We acknowledge we're going to come back to how to deal with duplicates. Duplicates is one type of data quality issue. The next type is outdated data. So an example of outdated data, we might have the wrong address or the wrong job title. It was correct at a certain point in time, but it is outdated. It is no longer the appropriate information that's in that particular field. So,
or they left the company, right?
They left the company.
Right.
They're no longer in a decision-making authority. By the way, even with opportunities, we have opportunities that were lost, but they're still in a stage of open because someone hasn't updated them. We can still have tasks that are still being marked as open, even though those things were in fact completed. So outdated data. The next one is incorrect data. Incorrect data is, by the way, if any of you have ever turned on, and I know we're going to get to that, we're going to mention this later on as well, state and country pick lists. So if anyone in the process of turning it on, like as we're talking about incorrect data, and if I give an example saying you might have the city does not match the state, or the city and state do not match the country. Well, at first you might say that never happens. I dare you. If you try to turn on state and country pick lists, what Salesforce has you do, basically it's a wizard. It's a very painful wizard to go through, but it's a wizard where you need to essentially review all of the data that you currently have in the system in order to confirm the country that you have. There might be state values that are totally not applicable. Country is United States, and the state, it says Paris or Tel Aviv or Morocco, or you have the city equals Florida and the state equals Miami Beach. Like, it's just incorrect. Like, there is no such thing.
And you have to be careful with integrations as well. If you have systems integrating and are mapped to those fields, you need to make sure that if you turn on state and country pick list, that your integrations will also continue to work.
Exactly. So duplicates, outdated data, incorrect data, and then we have non-compliant data. Non-compliant, when we say compliant, it could relate to certain laws or regulations, but it also might be it's simply not compliant with our internal rules that we have within the organization. In other words, every contact at a tier 1 account, every contact must have a job title or must have an email address, or the industry must be populated, or for every opportunity over a certain dollar amount, certain values must be there, and they are simply not there. So non-compliant data. State is missing on the address. So it could be very simplistic, and those are probably the easiest to address, because I'm sure even as I'm saying it, all of you are thinking of validation rules and just make it required. Yeah, not that big of a deal to address that one, but it is another kind of data quality issue that needs to be addressed. Gina, did I miss anything there?
No.
Okay. Next. So now that we know the different kinds of data quality issues that we might have, let's talk about the different ways that you can the different ways that some of these data quality issues are introduced into the system. And the way I see it, it's actually very, very simple. They typically fall into very few categories. The first one, Gina hinted at this before, which is APIs or integrations. So we have an integration happening between Salesforce and any other system. By the way, it could be something as benign as Outlook or Gmail. It could be something as complicated as Slack or an ERP system or QuickBooks. And data is coming from some other system into Salesforce, and that is what's causing some of these issues. The next type is a data that is fed through the web. So you could be using the native Salesforce web to lead or web to case functionality. You could have a tool like a Form Assembly or FormStack. And by the way, I am not knocking any of these tools. They are all fantastic tools, but any type of form-based tool that is out on the web that allows people to enter in information, and it automatically either updates or creates a Salesforce record. Someone types in their name, let's say in all caps, they put in a typo in their own email address, and it gets saved in Salesforce. So they are putting it in themselves, so that this is not a matter of blame. We're just talking factually, how do these issues come about? And that is one mechanism where they can come about. So any data that's fed by the web. Oh, by the way, one other example is any type of customer portal. So it could be an Experience Cloud implementation that you have, but it could be any other type of portal that you have where external people are accessing the system. They're creating records, they hit save, and it gets pushed into Salesforce. Gina, did I miss anything there?
No. We've seen all of that.
Yeah. So we have APIs. We have data that's coming in through the web, and then we have manually entered by users. So someone is actually keying it in, and that's probably the most obvious. Someone is actually keying it into the system, and that's how records, I'll call them defective records, are getting introduced into the system. The last one, which, by the way, many of us as Salesforce admins are very often very guilty of this, so be prepared, don't get insulted. Data that is batch imported into Salesforce. We've all been there, where we are on the receiving end of a spreadsheet and someone asks us to import it into Salesforce, and we ask them, did you review it? Are you sure it's accurate? Do you want to, do you realize it's going to overwrite the information that we have in the system already? And of course, the person shoving that spreadsheet at us is saying, I know it's clean. I reviewed it a gazillion times. Just upload it already. Did you finish uploading it yet? They always think it's as easy as adding an attachment to an email, and nobody wants to look at it, and they are going to blame you. So you, the Salesforce admin, is inevitably going to be the punching bag when all hell breaks loose. But that is another mechanism where defective data gets introduced into the system. So now that we know...
As admins, sometimes we make mistakes, right? Like, it's very easy to mismap a field. And if it's a text field, oops, we just caused a data quality issue. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I've done it. And I try to do things to prevent it from happening and work very slowly and act and look at everything. But sometimes those accidents do happen.
And what's
and it's
worse...
not to panic.
Yeah, and what's worse is it just gets magnified when we do something like that. And then there's some automation in the system that we built or we are already intimately familiar with that then gets kicked off by our data import. And it blows up in our faces.
That's when you want to use those own backup mugs and drink some beer.
Yes. And that's where the hashtag why admins drink comes into play, for sure. So now that we know the different kinds of data quality issues that might exist and the different mechanisms by which the data quality issues might get introduced into the system, let's talk a little bit about what we can do about it. So the first thing that we really need to do is identify the sources. So just like we talked about earlier, the different categories, the different ways that the data gets into the system, chances are that 99% of your data quality issues fall into one of those categories of how it got into the system. Now, once we know how it got into the system, let's narrow it down even further. Okay, it's an integration. Well, which integration is causing the issue? So let's identify the sources. Which web form is causing the issue? Which spreadsheet that was uploaded caused the issue? So we need to get a little bit more granular to figure out what that source was, to then identify, is there anything we can do about that source? Can we manipulate the data? Can we put filters on the data? Can maybe even in the integration, we make sure not to push through the integration some of those records in. Maybe even from the web form, it could be a SurveyMonkey form. And look at that, my camera froze on me. I was telling Gina before.
I was wondering if it was me.
No, I was telling Gina before we went live, when we go live, anything can happen. Anything can go wrong. And here we are.
And it's your turn because it was my turn earlier.
I'm going to take care of it. Hang on 1 second.
So when David says stop the bleeding, right? It's like if you have an integration and it's sending data and it's not conformed correctly or correctly, it's taking a look at that, right? And not really understanding like where is that coming from and can I fix it? And I might have to fix it in that other system, right? And not necessarily inside of Salesforce, but identifying where that's coming from.
Exactly. And by the way, that might also mean, let's go with that last scenario that we talked about, which is we or someone else on the team has been importing spreadsheets, and it's through the bulk importing of records that some of the issues came about. This is where we can use it as a lesson to implement some of our own internal rigor, where someone actually needs to sign off some level of formality, where someone needs to sign off that they did in fact review and they are going to hold themselves and others will hold them accountable for the issues that come about after the data gets imported into the system. The other example I was going to call out earlier is, let's say you're using a tool like a SurveyMonkey or a Form Assembly or a Form Stack, where you have some type, or even the HTML form, a web to lead form, and it's feeding data into the system. Very often on that web form itself, on that survey itself, there are some things that you can implement, not everything, but there are some things that you can implement to, maybe if it's from the formatting perspective, maybe it's just even a confirmation screen on the bottom asking the person, are you absolutely sure that you reviewed the information before you hit submit? So there are different things that you can explore where you don't have to make yourself all that crazy about. So once you identify where the source is, that's when you can explore some of the different options that we have available in order to stop the bleeding. So as it relates to stopping the bleeding, so I talked about some of those examples. Let's also talk about internally. This is where I'm going to pass it over to Gina, because I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. Internally within Salesforce, what can you do in Salesforce to try to minimize some of these defective records getting introduced into the system?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We talked about this a little bit earlier, validation rules, right? Putting in validation rules. So maybe at a certain stage, if the competitor information is not populated on an opportunity, you make it required, right? So there are certain ways that you can implement validation rules so that it's not, I don't like required fields because I feel like they lock you, and unless you know that field's going to be populated and has to be populated on creation of a record, then those fields should be required. If you over inundate your team with required fields at creation, guess what? Especially like on an activity or a task, like they're probably not going to put it in there, right? So you want to be very cautious around what's required on create and allow them to go through the journey, right? They might have a phone call conversation and want to log that phone, and maybe they don't know the potential products that the person's going to buy yet, right? So maybe that's later on in the journey that you give them that opportunity to say, okay, now we need this information. Setting up reports, I love having subscribed reports. And I know, David, I think you've gone over this before on how to subscribe to a report, but you can pretty much put in we created a data quality dashboard, but we also have data quality reports. So like if accounts get added to your system and website is what is a driver of something, right? If anytime an account is created, if website is blank, the subscribe report will say, oh, record count's greater than 1, send Gina an email because we have a record here that's blank. Right? Or maybe it's 10 or 100, it's depending on your org and what your needs are, right? For us, like number of employees at a company is important because that's everything routes territory that way. We need that when an account gets imported into the system. So we need to make sure that that's always populated. Pick list values, right? If you're going to set up fields for capturing data, utilize as many pick list values as you can. Checkboxes is like for me a big no-no, and I hate them when a user says I need a checkbox. I'm like, okay, if the checkbox is not checked, does that mean the user skipped it, or does that mean it's really false, right? So I'm a proponent of pick list. Yes, no, blank. Blank tells me, hey, he never even populated it, and no tells me yes, it's a no. So doing things like that to help drive the data effectiveness, the data quality in your system.
Yeah, so I just want to call out as it relates to reports. So also think of, even though we talked about reports and subscribing to reports, so I think of these as like a three-prong approach. And you don't necessarily have to use all three, but there are three tools accessible to you that fall into the same category: reports, list views, and dashboards. And very often people talk about gamification. We've all been there. We've all fallen prey to it with Trailhead and collecting badges and confetti coming on the screen. So there are many ways to implement gamification. Start to think about the dashboards, the list views, the reports in Salesforce in terms of gamification as well, because in the end, people are very competitive. Sales folks, by nature, are usually very competitive too. So whether you are calling out, you could think of it as a wall of shame or wall of fame. Here are the people who have, let's say, all of their tier 1 accounts that tier 1 accounts where all of the contacts do in fact have an email address, or those that do not have an email address, all of those opportunities over a certain dollar amount that are older than a certain, have been in that stage for longer than a particular period of time, all of those tier 1 accounts with no industry populated, start having them grouped by, in the reports and dashboards, you can start having them grouped by the account owner, by the record owner. And people get very motivated just by, they don't want their name, if it's a wall of shame, they don't want their name up there. If it's a wall of fame, they want their name up there on the very top. So that really works very well. And also it makes it a very interactive approach, because you can drill into the underlying records and take action on it immediately. So I just sort of wanted to...
And here's the thing too, we get so much Salesforce swag. You can very easily put a quarterly, hey, here's a plushie, or here's a piece of swag, a hoodie or whatever, to the person that keeps their data the most clean, right?
Absolutely.
There's methods of giving rewards for doing that.
And sometimes just calling them out on a Slack channel, on a chatter group, just calling in an email, just calling them out, congratulating them for having, let's say, cleaned up all of their defective records. It works wonders. Like, people don't need a lot to get motivated in the right direction. So start to think creatively and have fun with it. You're all on the same page. It's not about pointing fingers at anyone on the team. It's not necessarily their fault that the data is defective. They might have chances are they did inherit it. So they really had nothing to do with it. The only place where you could attribute fault is the person breathing down your neck saying, upload the darn spreadsheet. Are you done yet? But I digress. Anyway, so now
you've been there before, David.
Oh my God, with every client so many times.
We've been through it. We're doing an integration right now. We've been through it. Like, when are we going to have this done? When are we going to have this done? It's like, we want it right.
To me, the best is when a client asks, hey, how do we synchronize Outlook or Gmail? And I start asking, tell me a little bit more. What do you want to synchronize? And they say, all of our contacts and all of our calendar entries. I'm like, okay, so your dates with your significant other, when you have, I know I have in my calendar twice a week, I have a reminder to take out the trash. And that's going to get synced if it's not set up properly. So if additional action is not taken, those things will get synced into Salesforce. And from a contacts perspective, next thing you know, I have a meme about this somewhere online. Next thing you know, my mother-in-law is going to be synced from my Outlook or Gmail into Salesforce, and my colleague is going to start calling on my mother-in-law as if she's a prospect to try to do a product demo with her. Like, that's what's going to happen. So your data, we need to think a little bit through a lot of these things. And usually the senior management or the people asking for it, they just don't have the patience. They see the shiny object. They just want you to flick the switch and make it live without dealing with the implications. But in the end, if you are the Salesforce admin, if you are responsible for the implementation of Salesforce within your org, you will be the punching bag. People will turn and say, I don't understand what happened. This junk wasn't here yesterday, wasn't here last week. Who did it? And everyone's going to be pointing to you saying, I don't know, but Joe was the one who turned on. It's ever since Joe turned on that thing that it's not working right. And you don't want to be that person. You don't want to be Joe.
Exactly.
I'd rather be the policeman who's like, no, you're not getting it until you do X, Y, and Z. But anyway,
Right.
all right, this is not about group therapy for me. So now that we know how the defective data comes in, the different sources, and what we could do to stop the bleeding, that's not necessarily going to help us with cleaning up the existing data. And we did talk about, a moment ago, we just talked about some of the ways that you can start looking at, at least calling out some of the defective data, the list views, the reports, the dashboards. But there are more options that can be explored. So one, for example, is data enrichment tools. There are a ton of data enrichment tools. By the way, I'm purposely not even talking about duplication tools. There are certainly a ton of those. I'm not even going to necessarily even call out that one is better than the next, because honestly, I don't think they really are. There's one in particular that I have a strong preference for, only because it is very inexpensive and you could put it on autopilot, that even if, let's say, you have spreadsheets that are uploaded where duplicates are introduced, and again, we're only talking about a small sliver of data quality issues, duplicates. If you put in the rules of, we define a duplicate as follows, and here's what it should do when it finds the duplicate, here's which values of the multiple records should be saved, you put it into the tool, you put it on autopilot, and let's say once every evening, it just automatically performs the duplicate search and the merge. So, okay, that's great. But what we're talking about now, more specifically, is data enrichment tools. And there are many tools like that. What do we mean by data enrichment? A tool that will basically scrape from multiple sources, let's say the industry information from a company, the number of employees that they have, the headquarters, the address of the headquarters, the main phone number, or for various contacts to pull in information. And by the way, LinkedIn does not always have this information, and people are not always that good about updating LinkedIn with their most up-to-date information. So above and beyond what you might find on LinkedIn, to gather those pieces of information and essentially click a button and it will go ahead and fill it in Salesforce. So you can always explore data enrichment tools. And the other one is really just manual review and cleanup, like we talked about before. List views, reports, and dashboards. And I think that's it on the strategies around keeping your Salesforce data clean. Gina, did I forget anything?
Session.
I'm feeling so much better. All right, let's move on to the next segment. Gina, you ready?
I'm ready.
For the Show Me segment, where Gina's going to show us some really cool stuff.
So,
Sorry about that. I did not mean to cut you off with that.
Okay.
And okay, that's my notes. We're supposed to be here showing Gina's screen.
There you go. So my first disclaimer is I am no Steve Moe. He is the father of formulas and knows everything formula related. But this was just a problem that we were having here at Own Backup. We have a very, very, very complex approval process. And we use native Salesforce approvals. We're not on CPQ, so we're using native Salesforce approval processes. And those on the phone, I don't know how many of you are using approval processes, but this is actually one approval step in one of our processes. And when you look at this, there's a bunch of fields which I've masked for security reasons, a bunch of fields here and a bunch of values. And when you get to the filter logic, when you start to try to troubleshoot something like this, you're going, okay, what's in field 1? Okay, and is it 2 or 4? And then, okay, what's 2 and what's 4? And as you're reading through this, it became really, really difficult for us to manage. So one night when I wasn't sleeping, which happens often, I said, you know what if we put this into a formula? So I'm just going to show you basically what this looks like. And this is just for demo purposes, right? I created 2 formula fields, one saying that we need AVP approval and the other that we need VP approval. So what does this look like? So if we go into approval processes, which, sorry, I had a quick deviation here and forgot to bring this up. We had a little technical difficulty before we got on the call today. So what one of our processes looks like right now for AVP, it looks like this. And if I was to show you what the criteria looks like, and I have dumbed this down a little bit just for demo purposes, and this is definitely not what our process is, but this is pretty still complex, and there's still a lot of filter logic here. So by putting all this logic into a formula field, if I basically just have to come in here and say, is the AVP discount true? And if it is, enter this step and route it. So what does this look like, right? So if I pop over to here, I'm going to take you through little my hints on approval processes. First of all, as good admins, everything should have a description. Anyone on my team will tell you when I open something and I don't see a description, the first question, what is this for? What do we need this for? Why is this here, right? So you should always put a description. If Salesforce allows you to put a description in a field, you should definitely put what this is used for, right? So this checkbox basically indicates when the op is submitted for approval, if it should route to an AVP. Another little hint that I like to use, and there is a character limit, so if you do have a very complex process or formula, you might have to condense it to get it into the description field. Always, 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 I build formulas in production and test them every scenario. And I'm sorry, not in production, sandbox. What am I talking about? In sandbox. All formulas have to be built in a sandbox. But when I come over to production, what I will do is copy the old code and just put a date stamp on it and try to just put it into this description, because the description field, it's not like the help text. That's not being shown to my user. It's strictly to anyone that can see the back end. And if I have to revert very quickly, I could just copy and paste this back in, and I know that I'm back. Once I apply something new, I'm back to the original, right? So that's just a little hint that I do. Another thing I use is this Chrome extension called Formula Editor, Enhanced Formula Editor. And the reason why I like this is as you're doing your syntax, if you hover over any bracket or parenthesis, it actually shows you where it's going to end, right? So if I look here and I say my contains statement, where is that? This is very helpful when you're writing formulas in Salesforce, because sometimes we forget a quote, we forget a bracket, a comma, and we get syntax errors. And it gets very frustrating when you can't find them. It is a $20, it's a paid subscription. It's like $20 a year, and they give you a 2-week free trial. But it also works on your flows and your process builders. It helps just organizing everything by color coding it. And it offers a lot for you as an admin when you're building formulas. Formulas is not something I write every day, so I sometimes struggle with them when I have to do them. The other thing too is commenting, right? So here in my formula, I actually put a comment on every row so that I can see exactly what this formula is supposed to do. So here, my first statement is basically not all of the sales reps actually have an AVP that they report to. So basically, if it's blank, I don't want that checkbox checked because I don't have an AVP to route to, right? Very simple. The next is AVPs, they don't care about our renewal opportunities, right? They don't need to approve them. They've already been approved. So set that checkbox to false, right? Don't check it. It's not true. And then we get into some discounting, right? And this is all made up. This is not based on our business, but I will say we are part of the Pledge 1%. So we do offer a discount to nonprofits. So here I'm saying basically AVPs need to approve if it's a for-profit company, anything over 10%. And if it's a nonprofit company, we allow a 5% discount automatically. So it would be over 15%. So when I come into my formula, I'm basically saying if the discount rate is greater than 15, and we're just going to pretend that we're denoting that the website is a .org, a .edu, a .ac, a .uk as the nonprofit, then set the checkbox to true, right? Otherwise, if it's 10% and it's not any of those nonprofit websites, set it to true, and then the default is false. So how does this work, right? How do we see this in action? So if I come here to my demo opportunity and I look right now, my checkboxes are not checked. this is a .org website. So if I change this now to say 16%, right, which is my nonprofit discount, I should see that this checkbox gets checked, and it does, right? So when I come over to my approval process, you'll see, okay, if there's an AVP and it's true, route it to the AVP. So it just makes it this is very much easier to read, and I can expand this a little bit. It makes it much easier to read as a formula than it does in the actual approval process, if we came back here. And this is true. So this was one of our steps, which was really, really confusing. That's basically about it. I mean, I put in VP approval also, and that's a little bit different. So with this example, a VP needs to automatically approve if it's over 50,000. So if I set this amount to 60,000, which should be right, you'll see that this VP checkbox gets checked. The other nice thing about doing this in a formula, those that use approval processes, you know that when you make an approval process change, anything that's currently in a process will follow the older version, right? With having them set to formula fields, if I change the AVP criteria checkbox and it hasn't hit that step yet, it will reflect the changes immediately. So that's another advantage of using a checkbox versus a formula instead of using the actual native approval process. It's pretty cool stuff. I guess I can take questions if you want to open it to questions. That was a little quicker, I think, than I thought I was going to run through it. But, oh, wait, forgot one tool. Mm-hmm. So there's another tool called Formulon, and we'll put the links in the chat, which allows you to test your formulas. I was playing around a little bit with this, and my bigger formulas, it didn't like so much. I don't know if it was just my bandwidth at the time. So there's some here that just as an example you can use, but like the first one here is working days between two dates. So this would be your formula if you wanted to capture working days between two dates. So if I say here to test this, say, okay, show me February 10th to February 1st. It automatically shows you the result. So you can kind of test to see that your formulas are working. This was a pretty cool tool as well. It's free. It's just an online formula check website. And that's all I have.
All right. Good stuff. So we do have a couple of questions. These are questions that actually folks submitted. They're not necessarily following up on. Tim is very impressed. Hang on one second. Let me put this on the screen. Tim is impressed with everything that you showed about this really cool plugin. But there are not any follow-up questions on anything that you or I shared today. What we do have is some questions that folks submitted to me earlier. And I said, hey, if there's time, we're going to address it during the next show. So let's switch on over to the Q&A segment. All right, so here we are. So the first question that we're going to address is, let me make this a little bit, didn't mean to make it gigantic over there. So, senior leadership is obsessed with tasks and activities instead of statuses. They measure everything by tasks instead of opportunity or case status. Any advice? This is actually something that I have seen quite a bit. I wouldn't be lying if I would say it's one of my pet peeves, so this really has nothing to do with Salesforce functionality. To me, this has to do with what I'll call micromanagement. And it's not even that I have an issue with the principle, with the concept of micromanagement. When I'm on the receiving end of a request like this, by the way, what does the request look like? The request usually, for a Salesforce admin, the request typically looks like the following. senior leader in the organization says, listen, every time that, let's say, a new lead is created or a new opportunity is created, I want the following 5 tasks should automatically get created. They should automatically get assigned to the following individual. They should automatically have the following due date. And then when the lead or opportunity or case moves from one stage to another, or when this field is populated on that record, then the following 12 new tasks should get created to get assigned to that person. And you can keep going on and on and on. And you can all imagine. So on the one hand, if you're relatively new to Salesforce and you just learned how to build automation, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about flow or process builder or workflow rules that are about to go away. So it really doesn't matter, because the short answer is, technology-wise, yes, of course we can absolutely do that. But put yourself in the shoes of the employee who now has all of these tasks that get assigned to them. And we all know that in the real world, there are many exceptions of when all of those tasks do not apply, but nobody thought through those exceptions. Or let's say some of those tasks are not relevant because during the first conversation with the prospect, they already came with all of the details. They already provided all of the documentation. Don't create a task for me to collect the following 12 pieces of documentation. I already have it from that first interaction with them. And now that employee, that rep, let's call them a sales rep, now has to go ahead and close out all of these tasks. And what happens when, for whatever reason, that individual is no longer working on that lead or opportunity or case? It's supposed to get reassigned, or that individual, the user, is out on vacation and their colleague is covering for them. And what happens now to all of those tasks?
We go back to data quality issues, right?
Massive data quality issues. And then let alone when we have spreadsheets of, here are a bunch of new prospects, people that stop by our booth at the most recent trade show, just upload them into Salesforce, let's say as opportunities with the stage of whatever, or leads in the stage of whatever. And for each one record we have, even if it's only 5 tasks that are getting created, all of a sudden as the rep, we are all getting bombarded with all of these tasks. And it becomes completely overwhelming.
We actually had that. They had one of our admins build something on opportunities that every time new one was created, it created like 10 tasks for the close plan, right? And we did an analysis and only 1 task was ever populated. We implemented other processes for mutual closing plans, and we now are faced with ripping all this out. We had tons of tasks never started, which caused a data issue, and Salesforce charges you for the data you use. All right. And we had all these tests sitting there, never started for 2 years. So we went through and we literally wiped them. We wiped them out and shut off all the automation, and nobody's complained. So now we're pulling everything out. It is a big problem. And I think for me, the advice is showing the data that's in there, right? And the managers using reports to drive the conversations with their teams. Right? What is the next step here? 2 things we use on our opportunities are like next steps and notes, right? What are your next steps? And the managers will create list views of their team's ops, and they'll look at all of the next steps, and they'll follow up with their teams. And then they have a field that they can put notes to themselves on for each op, right? And driving reporting that way, it also helps to drive adoption, so that yes, if they're not, say, putting in a task that's important. Like for us, there are certain tasks that we have dashboards on that every day shows this is how many of those types of tasks were completed today. And people are looking at it, right? As opposed to, here are the 50 steps to close a deal. Here's all your 50 tasks. Go out and do it. Because you're right, David, not every task applies to every deal. So it's really leadership and pushing back a little bit and saying, well, what are you trying to get at? And let's figure out the best way to get to that.
100%. You called out on a lot of the common pain points and also outcomes of, in the end, when the dust settles, the exact scenario that you described, Gina, is exactly what happens. It usually takes not months, years later, years after. So immediately what happens is as follows. The end users get completely inundated. They try, with their best of intentions, they try to be compliant, but they simply can't. Because there's just too many tasks that keep getting created. So by the way, if the task says that I have to make the phone call, that means I need to actually make the phone call, capture the notes about the phone call, and then close out the task. So
Right.
even if I'm actually going to do it, I'm going to actually have that interaction with the individual that I need to have the actual interaction with, capture those notes. And by the way, those notes might result in organic tasks that need to get created. But if I am the user who's bombarded with, I'm drowning in all of these nonsensical tasks that are most of them don't even apply, you better believe it, I'm not going to be using the native task functionality. I'm going to be using a piece of paper and just write down my notes on a Post-it note so that I can immediately see these are the things that I really need to focus on.
Right.
And so that's what happens immediately. And then over time, senior leadership says, I don't understand. These tasks aren't getting closed. And they try to, crack the whip and remind and maybe even threaten and maybe beg their users to go ahead and comply. But in the end, someone is going to cave in, whether it is the senior leader or the end users are going to cave in. And it's usually 1 or more years later where they turn to the admin and say, listen, I have a gazillion open tasks that are assigned to me. Can you just delete all of them? Exactly like you described, Gina. Just
Yep.
delete all of them because I actually want to use that functionality and I haven't been able to use it yet.
Right. So report on the phone calls. Don't report on the task about the phone calls. How many phone calls did you make, right? As opposed to how many tasks did you close making a phone call. Agreed.
Exactly. And by the way, usually what comes hand in hand with this mindset and this approach to scheduling, automating the creation of tasks, usually what comes along with that is that the senior leaders want a roll-up, a count of show me, sometimes it's on a report, sometimes it's directly on a record. I want to see for this opportunity how many activities of this type were created or closed by the record owner within a particular time period. And it ends, no matter how you slice it, it ends up being a massive nightmare. Now, I often turn to senior leaders and I say, if you're going to do that, I am the employee and it's coming very clear to me that I'm not being measured on moving the opportunity stages, the milestones of progressing it further towards closure, but I am being measured exponentially on the number of tasks that either I create or I close. Well, that's what I'm going to be busy with. I am going to create tasks and close tasks. You want me to log the fact that I called every tier 1 customer once a week, once a month? I'll call them. Even if on the outbound voicemail, they tell me that they're out on vacation for the next few weeks, I will keep actually calling them because maybe you're also tracking the outbound phone call logs. So I'll call them. I'll leave a note in Salesforce of creation, closing out the task that I called and left another voicemail, creating the new task that I need to call them again next week. And I'm going to be measured on that. So on those reports, I'm going to look great. I'm a rock star. Have I moved any opportunity from one stage to another? No, because nobody cares. Nobody cares. So now to sort of play devil's advocate, putting myself in the shoes of the senior leader who says, but I want and I need my team to do all of the following things when we have a new opportunity or a new prospect or a new case. I want to remind them that these are the things that they need to do. Well, there are a lot of ways to accomplish that. Native out of the box in Path, you have the guidance functionality, the in-app guidance, where no, that's not what it's called. It's called in Path. I'm trying to remember the terminology of what it's called.
Isn't it in-app guidance? In-app guidance.
In-app guidance is where you could actually put guidance anywhere, which you can also use in-app guidance for that, by the way. But so you can use natively within Path. You can leverage the rich text component that's on the right-hand side in order to provide that bulleted list of typically when we have an opportunity for for an account in the following industry located in the following city, then you should do X, Y, and Z. So you can place it right there. Or,
Which we do. Yeah.
or you can go ahead and simply use a rich text component that is dynamically displayed. It's only displayed on the lead, on the case, on the opportunity, when the status equals whatever, when certain attributes are there, reminding the people here are the things that you're expected to do. So they're being measured on, the reports are measuring on the progress, the milestones of bringing that record over through completion to actually do the things that you need to do to win the deal, close the case.
You can also put key fields in that section, which is nice because that's when we talk data quality, right? That's the place where you can say, okay, at this stage, we're looking for these fields to be populated, as well as here are the bullets and here are the things that you should be doing in that path, which we utilize, like we overutilize, which is good. And it definitely helps.
Yeah. And Jennifer, thank you. It's Guidance for Success. That's what it's called.
There you
on
go.
path. So thank you for that. Anyway, so that's my thing on that particular issue. Let me go ahead and.
I saw a question on.
Millie had a question.
Okay.
Advice for beginners on formulas.
Advice. Definitely use the sandbox.
I'll tell you what I did when learning formulas. And honestly, what I've uncovered is this is how a lot of people have learned anything about coding, the exact same approach. So keep in mind, when I was first introduced to the Salesforce world and as a Salesforce admin, it was before Trailhead. It was before there wasn't a whole lot of content on YouTube or anything, but the principles still hold true. Basically, I found the PDF article that Salesforce had on sample formula fields and explaining the use cases of how they can be leveraged. And just by reviewing that, so today the same exact content exists, but now it's in the form of a knowledge article or somewhere in the help section of Salesforce. You can just do a Google search, sample Salesforce formula fields, and you can also use some other keywords like opportunity, contact case, lead, etc. And you're going to find a ton of sample formula fields over there. By simply reviewing, hang on one second, let me get to Gina's screen where she is sharing that right now.
Advanced formula fields. Google is your friend. That's my best advice.
And so just by reviewing the formatting, the syntax, that's it. Yeah. So this used to be one massive PDF. And if you click into any one of those, it'll get more granular.
Sample date formulas, right? So if you find out what year is a leap year, right? Find out which quarter a date is in.
So just by reviewing this, and as you're looking at this, you're going to realize, oh, wait, my organization can benefit from something like this, or even better, can benefit from something like this, but I want to make a little tweak. Well, you already have perhaps 80 to 90% of the formula right there for you. Then you just need to figure out what is the missing gap in order to customize it for your specific use case. So that is exactly how I learned everything that I know about formulas. And honestly, even today, very often I will go back to, because none of this stuff is fresh in my head, I will go back to look at posts like this in order to get sometimes actually even inspiration, let alone guidance for the formula field that I'm trying to build out. But sometimes I leverage it for inspiration to try and figure out, is there a way that I can have some logic and create a formula field to accomplish what it is that I need to do?
Yeah. Good stuff.
A couple of dings. Yes, absolutely. So there was another question. Hang on one second. Let me switch over to get back over here. We do have a couple more minutes. Let's address this one. What tools do you use when interviewing business users about their Salesforce needs and wants? So when gathering business requirements, I think we've all been there. Sometimes it's sort of like a half-baked idea. You're in a hallway passing someone, or they just send you a message on Slack. Hey, can you add the blah, blah, blah field to the blah, blah, blah screen? I don't know
So
what
here,
the
I'll
heck they're
give you
talking
some
about.
tips. This was pretty funny because when I first arrived my first week, my manager was like, you need to figure out how you're going to work. And like drove that in my head. By the second week, I had to have some kind of process in place. He said, because everybody's going to bombard you. And our company was kind of relatively small at the time when I started. So we implemented cases, right? We're admins. We live and breathe in Salesforce, right? You want a Salesforce change? You create a case. So over time, it's evolved, and we do ask things like, how does this request for change align with the business goals, right? And we plant those questions in the case creation process, right? So the general business questions, and everybody's business is specific, right? But we put that in, and now we're actually talking about building more requirements related questions, right? Around that. It's probably the hardest job, at least for me in my experience, is gathering business requirements, right? We need a checkbox. Why? What are you doing? It's the 5 whys that um, uh, admin podcast. I can't think of his name right now. Help
Mike
me.
Gerhold.
Mike Gerhold, yes, the 5 whys of business analysis, right? Why? Why do you need this? Why does it have to do that? Why do you need to report on it? And just keep digging, digging, digging. I don't know there's necessarily tools around it. It's more
It's a
asking the right business
conversation.
question. And as an admin, the best thing you can do for your business and your career is to learn the business. Don't just come in and say, okay, I create workflow rules, I create flows, whatever. Just tell me everything you need in the flow. No, you have to understand, how does the business sell? What do they sell? What types of products? How does the customer use their products, right? Understanding your business is key to helping to drive the requirements, because you'll know what questions to ask and dig, and just keep asking, right? If you're not clear, just keep asking more and more questions. I don't know, David, do you use a tool? I don't, for
No,
BA?
well, I use a lot of tools also because I'm a technology geek, but in the end, it has nothing to do with any tool. You're
Yeah.
100% right, Gina, because honestly, the questions that you called out are probably of top priority importance to ask when someone is trying to give you business requirements. What is this tied back to? What is it that you're trying to solve? What is the business problem? And unfortunately, even if you make it a web form, and we're only talking about internal users who would access it, or even they have access to Salesforce, so they're going to create a case. They're going to put in nonsense, vague nonsense. Why do I need it? To close more deals, to do my job. That's what they're going to say. They're not going to give you anything real. And I'm not aware of any tool in the world that can help you sort of like overcome that. You need to sort of have it as a conversation and basically sometimes sort of like feed into it. There's a book that I read a while ago, and it's called something like how to talk to crazy or something like that. And
We're
don't
not
ask,
saying that our
don't
coworkers are
no,
crazy.
not at all. And don't ask why I started reading it. But basically what I learned from that book is you sort of like need to lean into them. But basically, okay, so let's make believe, wave the magic wand, press the magic button, and I created that thing that you're asking for. How is your situation improved at all by having this? So you sort of like need to get them over that hump of, all right, so you're going to have it. Now what? Like, show me. I want to share in that excitement for you.
Right.
The reason why I'm suggesting that is because a lot of times when you turn to them and say why, they will immediately be very defensive and psychologically arms folded. Because I need it. That's why. Because I'm the boss. Because the CEO told me to tell you that he needs it. Like, okay, that's not going to help anyone with anything. So
But don't be afraid to ask others that it impacts or relates to. Like if a sales leader is asking you for something for sales, maybe you go to your CRO and say, they're asking for this. how does this impact you? Or what other things would you like to see here? We're going to implement X, and we're thinking that you might benefit from this, or somebody else in the organization. Maybe our support teams would like to know the information we're capturing from the sales team. So definitely be inquisitive, right? Kind of like a little PI within your company.
Absolutely. All right, we are at the top of the hour, so we need to wrap it up.
Cool.
Thank you all for joining this week, and we're both looking forward to seeing you again at another live stream that we have.
This was fun. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you, Gina.
Great, everybody.